Good morning. My name is Andrea Hampton. I am with the Lehigh University Small Business Development Center. We are the home of the Lehigh Export Network, which is one of 10 regional export networks here in Pennsylvania. We're a partnership with the Office of International Business Development. And through this partnership, we provide in-country assistance in 44 markets through 13 authorized trade representatives that the state contracts with abroad. Some of the things that we can assist companies with include market research, regulatory requirements, distributor searches. We can also assist with trade shows, identification, and we also help with the Global Access Program application. With that said, I will let my colleague Tony Pu from the U.S. Commercial Service introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Pu. I'm with the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the export promotion agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so I'm based at our Philadelphia office. We cover eastern half of Pennsylvania and all of Delaware. And so our mission is to exclusively with exports. So that's to drive economic growth and to create jobs in the U.S. And then how we do that is to help you grow your international sales. Our overseas presence, so we do have a team of specialists based at the U.S. embassies and U.S. consulates in nearly 80 countries. And the commercial specialists, they have a set of portfolios, industry sectors that they cover. So they're well connected with those key players, both on the private sector side, as well as the respective, government agencies and ministries for the industries that they cover. In terms of working with us, how we can help ranges from counseling you on your export strategy, so helping you to refine your export plan, getting you the up-to-date market research, the market intelligence. One service I wanted to mention that's relevant to today's topic is our International Company Profile Service, which is a background check, a due diligence check. So that's and there's two levels of it, but that's to make sure that when you get a lead or you get a partner in the country, to make sure that they check out before you proceed. We also have business-to-business matchmaking services, and then commercial diplomacy if you are bidding on foreign government procurements. So we work hand in hand with Andrea and her team at Lehigh SBDC. So feel free to ping Andrea or myself, and we can get you to the right resources. I'm going to pop in the chat after this our website, some of our key resources in my email. And that's it. So thank you again, everyone. And again, thanks, Andrea. And back to you.
Thank you, Tony. So today, talking about the top 3 OFAC mistakes even experienced exporters make, we have Deanna Clark. Deanna is the founder of the Clark-Esposito Law Firm with nearly 18 years of legal experience in the areas of U.S. Customs Law and Imports, OFAC, and BIS in relation to exports and logistics matters, and FDA, TTB, and DEA law in relation to vapor, tobacco, and hemp products compliance. She's also the author of the book, A Practical Guide to Fashion Law and Compliance, and the former president of the Organization of Women in International Trade, New York, and an advisory board member to the Urban Academy School for Global Commerce in Harlem, New York City. Prior to starting her own law firm, Deanna headed up the Global Trade Compliance Regulatory Division of a New York City-based 3PL and worked at a well-respected international trade law firm. Deanna and her team help clients streamline their global business operations. They represent clients, both foreign and domestic, on matters from implementing operational solutions to the resolution of imminent problems. In her free time, Deanna enjoys bird watching, taking walks, and spending time at the beach. Deanna, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thanks everyone for joining. Tony made a good point about, them being a good resource. Obviously, the SBDC is a great resource as well. And before I get into the presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of doing your background check, these intelligence reports that Tony talked about, because I'll give you an example. Oftentimes exporters, even the largest, even the most experienced, simply don't have in place the checks that they need to. And I've mentioned that because, to the extent we have smaller exporters on the line, I want you to understand you can do some of these basic things. I'm going to tell you how to do that right now. But coming to what Tony's, was talking about, I recall being called in to help with a case where a company, they were based in Europe, and they were involved in distribution. And so what they did was they would set up warehouses around the world so that this product that needed to be distributed could be close by regionally, so that when a part needed to be sent out, it could be sent out within a reasonable amount of time to its final destination. And at one point, this company decided, you know what, let's bring all of our inventory back to our home country. And the problem they came across, and in particular, we were dealing with, it was Nigeria. The problem that they came across is that they had $1.2 million worth of goods in a warehouse, and they did not know that anything that you import, anything that came into Nigeria, in their case, they exported it, but anything that had been imported into Nigeria could not be exported. And so they couldn't get their goods out. They had to find either secondary markets. Some of it got scrapped. So they were able to pull a little bit of money out of this $1.2 million investment, which they had always expected to be able to bring home. And so, really doing your legwork, if you will, in advance can help you save a lot of money. And certainly these resources are terrific. So, anything that comes up, I want you to understand, start there. To the extent you need further assistance, they've got partners who they work with, and they can point you in that direction. So again, I'm Deanna Clark, Clark-Esposito Law Firm. We are a New York City-based law firm where we help growing companies who import and export comply with government regulations. And working with importers and exporters, we have these two very different, really three when we include OFAC, OFAC, BIS, and then US Customs on the import side. And we're able to take a full look at global transactions, because sometimes something will be imported, an importer wants to turn around and export it. We have today this presentation, the top 3 OFAC mistakes, so the Office of Foreign Assets Control mistakes even experienced exporters can make. And OFAC comes out of the US Department of Treasury. Okay, so when we're looking at what OFAC is governing, OFAC is looking really at issues involving where something is going to, so a destination, who is it going to, whether a person or an entity, including banks. There's a lot of OFAC related activity and compliance as they relate to financial institutions. So it's not just companies like you who are sending things, whether physical commodities, or maybe you're exporting something electronically, whether software or blueprints or something else that is digital. They also then are looking at how is this thing going to be used? Something like encryption software, perfectly legitimate in some countries. Maybe in other countries, it's ending up in hands that the US government doesn't want them ending up in. So, this is the agency we're dealing with today. Last week, if any of you joined us, I was speaking related to the Bureau of Industry and Security, also related to exports. And for those of you who didn't get a copy of that, you can request a copy from Andrea, and she can provide you with a copy of last week's presentation. All right. So in today's presentation, what you'll discover are what these top 3 OFAC mistakes are. You're going to learn how to navigate avoiding these OFAC mistakes. And we're going to take a look at some real examples of these mistakes and the potential civil liability for making them. In terms of why should you even care? Well, here's why. The penalties are no joke, that's why. So civil penalties, you're looking at $250,000 or twice the value of each non-compliant transaction. So, but fortunately, they cap it to just $1,075,000 per violation. And understand, companies can go for years and not be aware of any wrongdoing. And a company could also simply be selling one unit, maybe one unit, a machine, is 350,000. Okay, but how many of those shipments did they have? Other companies could have smaller shipments. Let's say they are exporting, I don't know, life jackets or something. They may have several transactions. And so, it's important when you're thinking about how many transactions am I dealing with in my own business? This is the question that you should be asking yourself. You want to make sense of, okay, where is my risk, right? So those are the civil penalties, but of course you also have the criminal side. And normally when you're involved in business, you don't think, oh, I could go to jail because of something I'm doing in my business. But as you'll hear from me explain further into the presentation, there are reasons why criminal liability would be triggered. And when that is the case, criminal penalties run between $50,000 and $10 million per fine. And of course, you can face jail time, with a minimum amount of time being 10 years and then up to 30 years in prison. So it really is, something you want to pay attention to. And understand, even where there may be, an allegation by OFAC that you've engaged in some wrongdoing, there are what's called mitigating factors, which can work in your favor. Mitigating factors are things where the government will look at, this is the penalty that we've issued, but because of such and such mitigating factor, we'll go ahead and reduce that. So an example of a mitigating factor, believe it or not, is simply cooperation with the agency. Another mitigating factor is that you actually have an OFAC compliance program in place. So if they're able to see, and they're able to see because you have it written down, you have it documented, that you have made a good faith effort to try and figure out OFAC laws, how to comply with them as they relate to your business. So it can't be some out of the box, kind of a thing. But if it's tailored to your business and they're able to see that you've been trying to comply, that counts in your favor also. Okay, and there are other mitigating factors. But today I'm here to talk about the top 3 OFAC mistakes that even experienced exporters make. So let's move into mistake number 1. Mistake number 1 is not checking recent changes to sanctions. Okay, now we have this OFAC sanctions list search. And one of the things that they regularly update is called their specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, the SDN list. Remember, I was just saying how OFAC is looking at 3 things primarily: your end user, so this would include these people here, your end use, and the destination. Okay, now there may be hundreds of new designations or list updates at a time. And you also have to appreciate that, sanctions can come out of nowhere. So the law is one way, one day. The law is a different way another day. And it's just the nature of the beast. So in this case, let me see if I can make my screen a little bit bigger here. I can show you this. I don't know if I can, here we go. Okay, so OFAC has this sanctions list search function. And so it actually allows you to run a search, and you're able to do so, you can run it by the person. You don't have to populate everything. So you can run it by the person. Maybe that there's a special program it relates to, whether the Balkans or an Iranian or Sudanese or Cuban, etc. There's several, but you can find your program here. You can do it by address, city, state, country. Maybe of a particular list and you do it that way. And what ends up happening is, after you run your search, because you'll hit the search button, then your results show up down here. Okay, and this is a presentation, so I'm not on the actual website. We're just simply in the presentation. So I can't run a search for you, but you would have their name, address, the type of sanction, the program name, list, score, and then you just scroll down. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to see, hey, is there, somebody on the other side of my transaction that I can or shouldn't or know, or they're prohibited, that I shouldn't be working with. And even where it's the case that something is similar or a close name, you want to go ahead, or address, you want to go ahead and do some further due diligence to understand, who are you really? And then, okay, let me see if I can really do something with you. All right. Because it's could be the case that you can, but they're on this list. It may be the case that you absolutely cannot, because they are on this list. Generally, when you see somebody on this list, you automatically are to presume that you may not do something in terms of any sort of transaction with that party, even if you're just sending something and it doesn't cost anything, right? Which obviously as an exporter, you're selling goods. But if you just knew someone and you wanted to send something, you're not allowed to do that either. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So, major international events may affect sanctions regulations in surprising ways. And so what we've got over here is an update, and this was from February. And what it shows is that, at the time that Russia had proceeded to take actions the way that it did with Ukraine, the government just started coming out with different regulations. So things come out by regulation, things also come out by executive order, where the president just declares something one day and bam, everything has changed. And this has a real impact on companies engaged in business with Russia, whether they're exporting, whether they're using Russian freight forwarders, whether we had somebody come to us last week involving construction contracts. And because of what had occurred and the OFAC sanctions involving Russia, the question was, okay, can we move the contract forward? Can we somehow get it sold? There were different attempts to how to look at it. But those discussions are ongoing. In any case, the point is that businesses get impacted overnight due to recent changes. And so you can find these on the OFAC website. Their website is OFAC, OFAC.gov. Okay. So mistake number 2, not asking OFAC about prospective transactions. Before I get into this slide, I was just talking about if a name comes up on that list that we were just looking at on that OFAC search function. Sometimes we can ask, and we do that by asking OFAC about a prospective transaction. We can ask if this transaction may happen, and we can explain. So, we've had companies come to us, we've had individuals come to us and say, you know what, I'm on this list. I need to get off of the list. And guess what? You can actually come off of the list. So if there's a party that you want to do business with and they're on the list, there may be a way to get them off of the list. And we work that question out through also submitting a request related to a prospective transaction, okay, or in tandem with. So as the slide says here, export licenses may be hard to interpret due to specific restrictions on end use and may even lead to a sanctions violation. Now, interestingly enough, what this image is showing is actually out of our export administration regulations, otherwise known as the EAR. And EAR is governed by the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, who I did the presentation about them last week. The reason why we've got them in this slide, at least regulations governing them, has to do with that things that apply to BIS. If there's a license required for BIS, there's a good chance OFAC is also requiring a license. What kind of license? That's to be determined. But if you find you've got an export, the ECCN here, 6A005, lasers, components, etc., and we can see the license requirements down below. If there's a reason, you want to say, okay, let's also look into OFAC. And if you find that there may be something, we're not quite sure, you want to go ahead and ask OFAC, can we even do this transaction? Okay. Some export licenses and authorizations are very specific and may not apply to a transaction in a way that you think. I'll give you an example. We had a query just yesterday that came in talking about a prospective transaction. And this is actually quite common. We have, U.S. nationals, U.S. citizens. They have relatives, grandparents, parents who are in, Iran, and now they've passed away and they are first in line to receive an inheritance. Well, generally speaking, we can't do almost anything with Iran. However, obtaining an inheritance is actually an exception. That's something that can be done, but you need to go through the proper channels and, either determine, do I need a license to do this, or does this fall under an exception to a license? And there are some of those as well. Okay. Now, giving an example here, we have Airbnb, and they had been processing payments for individuals that traveled to Cuba for unauthorized reasons. Meaning, with Cuba, OFAC allows us to do some things, but not many things. For example, if students want to take a research trip to Cuba, there is, or there was anyway, but presumably it's still intact, that students are allowed to, under this research license exception, go ahead and go to Cuba for some sort of educational trip. If I wanted to go to Cuba for fun, I'm not allowed to. Just ordinary civilians with no reason, they're not allowed to go. And as it's written here, there is a general export license for authorized travel related transactions for professional research. This is also why a lot of professors will go and they'll take their students. Before getting to the settlement amount, on the bottom right-hand side, you can see this investigation lasted 4.5 years. And it's important to recognize that, because oftentimes companies who come to us say, we had no idea that we were even being looked at. And my answer to that is, just presume you're being looked at. OFAC is not as big in terms of just the number of transactions as the US Food and Drug Administration, for example. Food, drugs, cosmetics. I mean, most everything. Just look around the room that you're in right now. You've got something that the FDA has oversight of. Less frequent that there is something tied to OFAC sitting in the room that you're currently in. And so because of that, OFAC is able to really hone in on who's engaged in which activities as they relate to international business and transactions in general. So they can take their time, do an investigation. Companies will not know about it. Certainly, Airbnb has some kind of, probably a team of lawyers helping them oversee things. And even they got it wrong. So going up from that, we see 3,464 stay transactions. So they just went in and let all these people do whatever they felt like doing. And then another 3,076 experience transactions. And what that means is Airbnb also sells excursions. They sell experiences in the country that they have their host homes. So, they had quite a bit. Now, they managed to settle for only $91,172.29. Certainly, the amount that they were initially hit with was significantly larger. And while I couch this as a fortunate event, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, participating in today's program, just happen to have a spare 92 grand lying around that you'd happily pay out to the government for really no good reason. Airbnb could have spent a little bit of money, paid some lawyers, got these things squared away, and never have had to deal with not only the settlement, but the investigation, the going back and taking time to show OFAC the different transactions for the last 4.5 years, hiring other people potentially to comb through all of their millions of transactions. It truly is invasive to have OFAC investigating your company. And so, the settlement sounds pretty good to me because I've seen much higher amounts, but the real cost behind that is significantly higher. So again, starting with Tony and Andrea's offices, you really want to make sense of what you're doing and how to just take care of your business so that the government doesn't take care of you in a way you don't want to be taken care of. All right, mistake number 3. So the negligent management of distribution and processes. Yesterday I was speaking with somebody somebody about just transactions in general. And, they shared this idea that once upon a time, they would have thought, you know what, I didn't do it, they did it, so it's on them. Unfortunately, as an exporter, OFAC doesn't view it that way. If somebody else did it, it is also on them, but it's also on you. And so, when you're looking at who am I doing business with, you don't just want to be looking at, all right, well, this is what I'm doing. I'm selling it to you. Everything's fine. You actually want to understand your supply chain, and you want to understand it well. Okay. The reason for that is because OFAC has what's known as a strict liability standard. It's for sanctions violations, and it means that if your export transaction violates a sanctions program, regardless of your direct involvement, that you'll be held liable for penalties. So liable for, that means they can accuse you and they'll say, we want this much from you because you violated X, Y, Z. Before continuing, I want to mention, when you discover that something has gone wrong, you actually have an ability to go to OFAC and tell them, hey, we discovered this problem. You can do it once, you can do it, sort of let them know and then come back with the full story, or you can just come with the full story. But essentially, before they begin investigating you, or before you have knowledge of an OFAC investigation, you can go to them and say, we discovered the following. And you explain what had happened. You explain how you had these checks in place. This nonetheless happened. We're going to pull and send you a list of every transaction that we can find so that you can have the full picture, and you go from there. The reason why you want to go ahead and do that, okay, is because you avoid even higher penalties. What they do is they give some lenience to those who are good, in good faith, good actors in the trade community. They'll give you a break if you have come forward and said, oh, we discovered this major problem. What is a major problem? Let's say you have been exporting farm equipment to South Sudan, thinking that it was perfectly fine. There are some things known as the humanitarian purposes, that certain things are able to be exported, even to countries like Iran, like South Sudan. And medical devices, for example, fall into that. Certain types of food fall into that. So if your company were, exporting farm equipment thinking that there was no problem, and by exporting, you probably weren't exporting it direct to Iran because that would have raised a flag. But if you're exporting it to Spain, and it just so happens, that your Spanish company was then turning around and exporting them to Iran, and you realize, food is okay, but farm equipment is not okay, then that would be the kind of situation where you come forward, okay? And presumably you didn't know you were doing anything wrong. Of course, the US would want to understand, and why were you sending it through another country onto Iran? But if there were a good reason, maybe you sent so many things over, you had a volume discount on your shipping, then that shipment was broken out once on the other side, meaning in Europe, and then, just payment onward to that final destination, was cheaper. Maybe that's why. The point is, there needs to be a basis, at a real basis, not a fraudulent one, for why you may have done something or other. But because you now know, in any case, that we have very few allowable transactions with Iran, having somebody in your supply chain who does something wrong because of this strict liability standard can leave you on the hook, okay? So you could still be pulled in and held liable for penalties. And that's why if you discover something, even if you think there's some wrongdoing, you want to go ahead and raise that with them. If you're not sure how to approach it, you should probably find counsel, whichever counsel. I'm not suggesting you even come to us, but whomever you find to help you, make sure they actually understand OFAC, okay? Because most attorneys don't. And then you can come up with a strategy on how to approach OFAC and which things you want to disclose in what order, okay? Many large companies use third-party distributors when shipping products overseas, and lots of small ones do too. We have some companies who we represent, they're maybe at about 500,000 a month in revenue. They also use third-party distributors, Asia, New Zealand, Australia, all over the world. Now, third-party distribution agreements may be very complex and involve cargo being in the possession of multiple parties before arriving at the end user. And we've seen cases where something was delivered, the shipment, a small shipment, it was e-commerce shipment actually. The e-commerce shipment was delivered to, I think it had been, might have been a Swiss freight forwarder. Its final destination had been to the Crimea region of Ukraine. And, you're not allowed to send things there. So ultimately, because a Russian freight forwarder picked up the package, there was no issue to deliver it there as far as they were concerned. Had it continued to be the Swiss one or a company with a US presence, absolutely not okay. So the point is, this company didn't know that all of these shipments kept going into these parts of the country that were prohibited in terms of transactions with the United States. And so they came forward, and with our help, we went to OFAC. We said, hey, we have several dozen transactions. Here's what we had in place. Here's how we had checked against these postal codes. Here's what we did XYZ. And as a result, they were able to walk away without having to pay anything, actually. Not to OFAC, not to BIS, when we disclose this also to BIS, nor to census. And remember, anytime you have a shipment where at least one of the commodities has a value of over $2,500, that needs to be reported with census, and you do your formal export declaration in the automated export system. All right, let's see here. Third party, okay, we went over that part. And so here's an example. We had a Texas-based animation hardware and software systems company, and they sold products to 2 third country distributors with knowledge or reason to know that its products were intended specifically for a reseller located in Iran. And again, because of the Iranian sanctions, which are not brand new, they're not brand new, and they're not something that's coming out today or tomorrow. Of course, there are tweaks to them, but this is a well-established body of sanctions. And so as an exporter, it's important for you to even know your top 10 list, if you will, of where you cannot send things. Something like North Korea, you just can't send anything there, just not permitted. But even with that, are you exporting something nearby North Korea? Obviously, China and North Korea have very strong trade relationship. So even if you find, we have a shipment and it's heading to this location, it's fairly close to the North Korean border, could there be a chance that the thing I'm selling to this Chinese company will be trucked over, into North Korea? Always, you want to have a system in place so you can understand, should I be asking more questions? I know you want to close on that sale. I know you want to get that contract in place, but the contract, if it's to have longevity, you want to make sure that all your ducks are in order. And you also don't want to lose sight of what appears to be an opportunity, only to turn around and find, that you've actually injured your company, potentially your lifestyle, your family, etc. Okay, so if you have any reason to know, and you'll have any reason to know, certainly if you do your due diligence, then you're in a position to say, hang on, let's make sure we can or shouldn't, or let's go for it. Everything's just totally fine. And again, starting on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you can see this investigation also lasted several years. So it's not the case of, well, nobody's caught me yet. No one's caught you yet, but they certainly could be watching you. Okay, we had 52 apparent violations, 49 products sold. So what looked to be like violations, and then they have their universe of how many had actually been sold. Again, they were able to settle for under $200,000. Considering what they could have been, that is very good. Again, I doubt, most, if not everybody on this call have a spare nearly 200,000 lying around to pay out to the government when you didn't even know you were doing anything wrong. And again, as it says here in the quote, with knowledge or reason to know. So it's not an excuse not to know. And for that reason, it's important to have some type of due diligence program in place. Look, you could have been engaged in export for several years now. You may have nothing in writing. That's okay. Start today. Okay. The point is that you begin and you put together something that is documented. And then you're able to say, okay, here's what we're looking at in terms of OFAC compliance. Here's what we're trying to do. All right. So wrapping this up, I wanted to just point out some of the resources that our law firm has. So we're the Clark-Esposito Law Firm. And actually what I'll do is we have our YouTube channel that I want to first show you. We have on here several videos. Home, I've got us on the videos, but we do have playlist channels and a little bit about us. And what you'll find in here is that we have several things related to sanctions, related as well to customs, related to exporting. And you'll find some of our videos from even a couple of years ago have to do with OFAC. We have some here going through an OFAC investigation alone, deemed exports. I talked about if you're exporting software or something digital. We have things related to EAR controls and classifications. I mentioned those are our export administration regulations. Understanding ECCNs, how do they work? What are OFAC sanctions? What is OFAC and what does it do? This is one of our more popular ones, nearly 6,000 views. So, we've got a wealth of information here for those of you who want to continue your learning. And on our website, we have our free resources tab here at the end. And so we've got several handouts. The handouts are accessible through the different practice areas. You just press here, access handouts, and that would bring you to our exports, OFAC, and BIS section. We also have our legal guides, and our legal guides are a series of articles. Last week, for example, we did a presentation related to OFAC compliance on NFTs and cryptocurrency. We, of course, did the ones with this office related to BIS and export violations. Get ready to pay dearly. In this video, we explain how it's not only OFAC who's coming after you if you're facing some allegations, and you could have some serious penalties. So, these are some resources we've got right here on our website. And of course, anytime you'd like to speak with us, we have our consultations page, and this explains just a little bit about our process. Okay, so just then to end, I'll open it up to questions. Again, my name is Deanna Clark. We do as well have an Instagram page. We are at Clark-Esposito Law Firm. And we invite you to follow us, connect with us. Our general email address is contact@clarkespositolaw.com, and you can learn more about us here at our web address. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Deanna, for today's presentation. We don't seem to have any questions right now. So I'll go first. What I hear often is because it's the Office of Foreign Assets, it doesn't apply to me. Their regulations do not apply to me. So are there actually any industries where OFAC wouldn't apply?
No, actually there isn't. And the reason for that is because OFAC, as I mentioned at the beginning, is looking at three things in particular. They're looking at the end use. So how will this be used? The end user, who's receiving it, and where is it going to, the destination. And the end user piece, for those thinking, well, I'm immune to OFAC. Not at all. Who is this really going to? Oftentimes it's okay, well, I'm selling this over to you, right? You meaning another business. Well, where is that business turning around and selling the product that you've exported to them? Or do you know for a fact that they intend to use it? And if they are, for how long? We've had equipment, clients who've had equipment go to universities, but the intention is after being used at a university after 5 years, it's going to go somewhere else. Okay, well, guess what? Where an export goes somewhere else, that's actually called a re-export if it leaves the country. And if it's heading somewhere that the US has a problem with, whether today or in 5 years, then you could still be subject to having a problem. Because where the United States catches that you have a transaction en route to such and such, or that actually arrived in such and such, because understand the government, we have people on the ground, our government, as in we, has people on the ground, and they are conducting investigations in foreign countries every day of the week. Okay. So they already know where things tend to end up. The stuff that we hear about, these settlements, these investigations, these are happening because they have been looking for a long time. And so even though people think that they're, and they could very well be under the radar for now, but that doesn't mean that they'll continue to be under the radar. Even one day, you're driving something up to Canada. One day you have a different officer who comes and inspects your vehicle to see what you're bringing in. Oh, you've got, 3,000 knives in your trunk. Well, what are these doing here? What are these for? Okay, well, where are they ultimately going? Right? So generally the end user, and of course then the end use, because if the use is in turn, well, it's going to this militia group, or it's going to, some place you wouldn't expect it to as a US seller, you need to ask those questions because you're definitely not under the radar.
Thank you. And are there, special considerations that service companies need to have? I know it gets a little tricky when it's not a tangible export. So are there any tips that you can provide to service companies?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry. It seems that when it comes to export compliance, service companies, it just gets a little trickier because a lot of it is done online, right? Are there any tips that you can give service companies to make sure they remain compliant?
Mm-hmm. So service companies, just because they're selling something that isn't being put, whether it's a small shipment and you're sending it out by courier, or larger shipment and you're putting it onto a vessel, that doesn't make you immune. This actually is a problem that comes up all the time with universities engaged in research who are emailing, sending schematics of machines or things that are sensitive. In fact, many universities have their own dedicated OFAC compliance attorneys for this very reason. And, as an exporter, and I don't know what kinds of things your clients are exporting, but they have to have their own due diligence program, their own OFAC compliance program in place. Here are locations, considered low risk. Here are locations considered high risk. There's several factors. I mean, quite frankly, it really turns on the nature of the business. But if a company is looking to start up a program, then they want to just take a look at, what are the OFAC pillars? What are the basic things that we need to be focusing on? And again, it's the end use, end user, destination. And how can we come up with our own internal rubric to gauge risk? In addition to what questions should we be asking our prospective customers? The one thing that we help clients with is to come up with an export control questionnaire. And this is really a customer vetting, product that is used to take a deeper look into who are we even buying from. And again, Tony mentioned these intelligence reports. Just even understanding the landscape that you're heading into is helpful. Are you heading to France or are you heading to Azerbaijan? Are you heading to Venezuela? Venezuela has a lot of different people, a lot of individuals who are flagged, who are on lists. So those people, those same people, or government-owned entities, which are many, same situation in China, they can pose problems. And so, we're only talking about OFAC today, but as I spoke about last week in relation to BIS, really what you're doing is you're merging the two to take a total look at your export compliance program so that you're meeting both of those requirements. It can really turn into a lot. But you want to start with your OFAC basics.
Thank you. Again, there don't seem to be any questions, but I wanted to thank you for your time and for all your expertise. Yes, Tony, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had a follow-up question to that. And so, Deanna, first of all, thanks. That's an excellent presentation. When a business is looking into, you're saying who is buying the product. I know that companies will look at OFAC's, what do you call it, the 50% rule. So do you have any best practices for that? Checking to make sure a block person doesn't own 50% or more. I'm thinking more in the case of when it's indirect ownership and you have to look at maybe multiple entities, and how do you aggregate that and make sure that's not over 50, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, honestly, each case we look at on a case-by-case basis. And if somebody wants to do something with someone who's on a blocked list, for OFAC purposes, normally we would say, let's go and ask them about this prospective transaction. And then it's up to the client. Do they want to, it's because it takes time and money, right? Do we want to wait to find out if this prospective transaction is a go? Do we just want to roll with it and see what happens? Which of course we don't recommend you do. But the problem with the people on the list is, how do you get enough information to feel confident with your decision, right? So if you can say, okay, we found this, we found that, it looks like it's this, but are you actually getting all the information you can about that blocked party? We had, this is a BIS related, but the EAR has this thing called the unverified list. And people, institutions, companies, they get added, they get removed. And this just comes out in what's known as the Federal Register. So somebody decides that this is, different somehow, and this whole Nicaraguan family is now off of the list. And we saw that happen last year, actually. This was OFAC. But because of the difficulty with understanding, is this a concern to the United States still? For that reason, Tony, questions do come up to this 50%, or how do we figure it out? To the extent it's clear that we can't figure it out, we take our best information and we go ahead and we ask OFAC about this prospective transaction. Okay, we don't just guess at it. Where a client does want to just guess at it, then it's okay. Well, then here's a legal memo laying out what you had done in terms of your due diligence, with the goal being, A, you did enough and there won't be any problem. But B, if there is a problem, now you have a mitigating factor. But again, that you still need to call the lawyers in to deal with your mitigating factor. And having them investigating you is going to be significantly more expensive than just you going and asking about a prospective transaction in the first place. So for that reason, you're actually saving money when you think about it. And so we would lean towards that way, Tony.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
So I guess, would anybody like to unmute and ask a question? We can stay on another, few minutes if somebody would like to unmute.
While we wait to see if anyone has any last minute questions, I just again wanted to thank you, Deanna, for your time and your expertise. And I wanted to thank Tony for making this possible today.
Likewise. Well, thank you to you both. And thanks everybody for joining us today. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletter on our website. If you go to our website, Clark-Esposito Law Firm.com, you'll have a thing pop up and you are welcome to add yourself to our newsletter. And we're always putting out more information related to OFAC and our other practice areas. We'd be happy to have you join us. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day. I am going to go ahead and end the webinar now. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me and keep an eye out for the recording of today's presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.